Yes, Senator, I do.
President Trump stated March of this year at a public event, quote, "We have rogue judges that are criminals. They're criminals, what they do to our country, the decisions they hand down and hurt our country. Is it possible for a judge's decision to be correct as a matter of fact and law, even if it differs from the president's desired outcome?"
What happens when the clearest line in the Constitution is spoken out loud, and the people seeking lifetime power in the courtroom suddenly refuse to say what it means? In this tense Senate hearing, Chris Coons asks a question so direct it should not require strategy, hesitation, or escape. If the 22nd Amendment says no person can be elected president more than twice, can Donald Trump run for a third term in 2028? And in that moment, this stops being a routine confirmation hearing. It becomes a test of something much bigger, whether judicial nominees will apply the plain language of the Constitution plainly, especially when the answer collides with the most powerful figure in their party.
Chair. Thank you, Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, and to each of you and your families, congratulations. And thank you for raising your hand to serve and in some cases continuing to serve the public.
Thank you.
Mr. Marck, if I might, just tell me about the 22nd Amendment. What does it provide?
The 22nd Amendment, Senator, my career has mostly been in criminal prosecution. I haven't had an opportunity to use that one specifically.
Anyone able to help on the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution?
Well, Senator, I believe it is the amendment that deals with a two-term limitation on
Correct.
the service
It
of the
states
president.
no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Mr. Marck, is President Trump eligible to run for president again in 2028?
Senator, without considering all the facts and looking at everything, depending on what the situation is, this to me strikes as more of a hypothetical of something that could be.
It's not a
raised.
hypothetical. Has President Trump been elected president twice?
President Trump has been certified the President of the United States 2 times.
Is he eligible to run for a third term under our Constitution?
I would have to review the
All I need to tell you is
it.
the language of the constitutional amendment that makes it clear that no, he is not eligible to run for a third term. Anybody else brave enough to say that the Constitution of the United States prevents President Trump from seeking a third term? Anybody willing to apply the Constitution by its plain language in the 22nd Amendment? Nobody. All right, let's move on. Mr. Coons, what is res judicata? How does it apply?
It's a judicial doctrine that prevents a judgment that has been, in one case, applies to a, you can't go into court after a final judgment in one case and have it, and litigate the same things again.
How is that distinct from collateral estoppel, which precludes litigating the same things?
Res judicata, one involves the same party, the other involves the same things.
And what's a requirement for these two doctrines to apply?
Notice, opportunity to be heard, final judgment of a court of competent jurisdiction.
Anyone disagree? If I might, Mr. Coons, is it pronounced the same way mine is?
Yes, it is.
Kuntz?
Yes, Senator.
My family's name was spelled that way when we came to the country. So, you were one of 3 judges on the panel in Alexander v. Trump, where the president was suing the Pulitzer Prize Board for defamation. When did your work on that case begin? When were you assigned this case to decide?
I first learned of that case in approximately January of 2025.
Not when the briefs had been filed?
No, Senator. The way it works in our court is we are not assigned cases when the briefs are filed. Once the case is ready for disposition, the clerk randomly assigns it to the judges in the court.
And when did you first speak to Senator Scott's office about your interest in a district court seat in the Southern District of Florida?
I mean, I've had many conversations with Senator Scott's office. The one about an interest in the Southern District of Florida, I believe, was in November of 2024. I don't know the date, but it's in my Senate Judiciary questionnaire.
And when did you release the opinion ruling in President Trump's favor in this matter?
So I learned of the case in January of 2025, and the opinion was released in, I believe it was February 12th, 2025.
That's correct. So you issued an opinion where one of the litigants before you was the president and in favor of the president while you were in active conversation with the senator's office about seeking a federal judicial appointment. Is that correct?
For a position I did not, in fact, get, Senator.
How did you end up in front of me today?
It's a different position, Senator.
Did you consider recusing yourself from that particular decision?
No, and the canons that govern us in Florida, Senator, as I believe this committee has previously heard, it did not call for me to recuse myself. I did not have an interest in the litigation, and none of the basis called for recusal. And the Florida Supreme Court instructs us, the appellate judges, that we are not to recuse unless one of the bases in Canon 3 exists.
Does the Florida canons not require you to recuse if one of the parties before you has an interest that could be reasonably concluded by any common citizen to cloud your judgment on that matter?
Senator, I disagree with that characterization. I had not heard from the White House until after the opinion was final. I had only spoken.
When did you interview with the White House counsel's office?
At the end of February of 2025. I don't know the date, but I believe it's in my Senate Judiciary questionnaire.
Thank you for your testimony on that matter. Mr. Hendershot, if you would just take a minute and talk me through again how collateral estoppel and res judicata are different from each other.
Senator, I'm not sure I can improve much on Judge Kuntz. I think that often res judicata today is used as sort of a catch-all term, but generally I think the difference is between claims and claims that may have not been brought but could have been brought potentially.
Right.
So collateral estoppel and res judicata is more a thing actually decided, as the Latin would suggest.
Thank you. Do you agree that judges should not be influenced by external pressure to rule in any particular way?
Yes, Senator, I do.
President Trump stated March of this year at a public event, quote, "We have rogue judges that are criminals. They're criminals, what they do to our country, the decisions they hand down and hurt our country. Is it possible for a judge's decision to be correct as a matter of fact and law, even if it differs from the president's desired outcome?"
Senator, I want to tread carefully because of Canon 5 in terms of commenting on political matters. But in the abstract, yes, decisions can be correct, and any citizen can criticize what a judge has done. That is, I think, part of their right to speak.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony.
Yeah. Mr.
And that is why this exchange lands with so much force. On the surface, it is only a few minutes long. There are no raised voices, no dramatic walkouts, no headline-grabbing chaos in the usual sense. But the real intensity of the moment comes from how simple the question is, and how revealing the silence becomes. Chris Coons does not begin with a legal maze. He begins with the 22nd Amendment, one of the plainest constitutional limits in American public life. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. In ordinary civic language, that should end the discussion. But inside this hearing room, what should have been the easiest answer becomes the hardest one to say out loud. That hesitation is the story, because when nominees for lifetime judicial office are asked whether a president already elected twice can run again, the country is not just listening for technical competence. It is listening for constitutional nerve. It is listening for whether the people who may one day sit in judgment over the most powerful disputes in the nation are willing to state the obvious when the obvious becomes politically uncomfortable. And in this hearing, Coons turns that discomfort into a spotlight. He strips away theory, strips away abstraction, strips away procedural fog, and asks for the one thing democratic systems depend on at the highest level, a straight answer. What makes the scene so effective is that Coons understands the power of plain language. He is not asking the nominees to predict some impossible future case filled with unique factual complications. He is not asking them to prejudge an obscure dispute buried in complex doctrine. He is asking them to read the constitutional line as it stands and tell the public whether it means what it says. When one nominee drifts toward hypothetical language, Coons snaps the moment back into focus. "This is not hypothetical," he says in substance. "Trump has been elected president twice. Is he eligible again?" And that is where the room changes. Because now the issue is no longer legal theory. It is whether caution has begun to overpower clarity. Then the hearing widens, and that matters too. Coons does not stop at the third-term question. He moves into res judicata, collateral estoppel, recusal, judicial ethics, and whether judges should be influenced by external political pressure. At first glance, those may seem like separate topics, but in the structure of this hearing, they are all connected by one deeper concern. What does independence actually look like when ambition, politics, and power enter the room? That is the hidden architecture of the exchange. The constitutional question is the flashpoint, but the real theme underneath is judicial integrity. That is why the questioning about the Florida case becomes so important. Coons presses a nominee about ruling in favor of President Trump while also being in active conversation about a possible judicial appointment. The nominee insists the rules did not require recusal, but Coons is clearly pushing on something larger than technical compliance. He is raising the question every ordinary viewer immediately understands. Even if a recusal rule was not formally triggered, could a reasonable citizen look at this and wonder whether the appearance of impartiality had been compromised? That is a powerful narrative turn because it moves the hearing from constitutional text into public trust. And once public trust enters the frame, every answer matters differently. By the time Coons reaches the subject of judges and outside pressure, the hearing has built a full moral arc. He references Trump's attacks on judges and asks, in essence, whether a judicial decision can still be correct even when it contradicts what the president wants. That question sounds obvious too. And yet, in the context of this hearing, it hits with extra force because it echoes the same anxiety running through the whole exchange. Can judges remain judges when politics demands loyalty? Can nominees remain faithful to law when party power rewards ambiguity? Can a constitutional republic survive if the people entrusted to interpret its rules become afraid to say clearly what those rules are? And that is why this clip works so well as a piece of political storytelling. Not because it provides some giant final verdict, not because anyone pounds the table, but because it captures a very modern democratic tension. The more powerful a political figure becomes, the harder it seems for institutions to speak in unambiguous terms. The Constitution does not tremble. Paper does not hesitate. Text does not dodge. People do. And in this chamber, that gap between written law and spoken reluctance becomes the entire drama. For the audience, that creates retention because the moment feels bigger with every passing second. At first, it looks like a normal Senate exchange. Then it becomes a civics test, then a character test, then an institutional test. By the end, the viewer is no longer merely watching a senator question nominees. The viewer is watching the stress test of constitutional language itself to see whether it still has authority when speaking plainly becomes politically costly. And maybe that is the lasting image of this hearing. Not outrage, but reluctance. Not noise, but evasion. Not a fight over what the Constitution says, but a visible discomfort with saying it in full view of the country. That is what gives the moment its power. Because in any democracy, there will always be arguments over policy, personality, and power. But when even the clearest constitutional boundaries begin to sound negotiable, depending on who is affected, people stop hearing a legal debate. They start hearing a warning. So as this moment ends, the real question is not just whether these nominees knew the answer. The real question is why so few seemed willing to say it. And that is where the story becomes bigger than Trump, bigger than this hearing, and bigger than one Senate exchange. It becomes about whether the guardians of the law still speak with enough clarity to protect the law when it matters most. If you are still watching, ask yourself this. When the Constitution is clear, should a future judge ever sound uncertain? Because the answer to that question may tell you everything about the moment America is living through right now. And if you want more breakdowns where a short hearing reveals a much bigger national story, stay with us for the next one.